Hi, I'm Debbie Forster, and I'm the CEO of the Tech Talent Charter. I'd like to welcome you to our evening cuppa, the last session of our first Flexi Festival here at the Tech Talent Charter. It's been an amazing 3 days. I've enjoyed every bit of it, but I do miss having you all in the room. If this is your first session, let me just give you a quick glimpse of how to use the screen here. Where normally I'd be talking to you about fire exits and where to get your coffee. Let's talk about the screen. So as we talk today, we want to carry a conversation. You'll be hearing from an amazing panel later. And if you'd like to add some questions, we'd like you to ask those questions. So just scroll down a little bit. There's 2 tabs. The first tab is Q&A, pretty self-explanatory. Throw those questions in and they will magically appear for our panel to answer later. The second thing I'd love to do is, it is important for us to understand where we stand on things. And a bit later on the panel, we're going to be talking about the whole of the pipeline. And we'd like to understand for you as an organization, what are you doing in this space? So please have a look at our poll, fill that in. That's really very useful for us. We'll talk during the day about things like our open playbook. We will be talking about our report. If you've not had a chance to look at that, if you scroll down on the page, you'll see where you can download the report, the directory, and you can also have a look at our open playbook. Those are free for you to use. We'll allude at the end of the session to all the things we've talked about this week. Now, if you find yourself really disappointed at missing some of that, you'll see the schedule below. But we've actually been posting all of this to YouTube. So you can have a look at our YouTube channel after today, looking at those topics that we've covered in detail across the week. Farther down, there's some of you who are joining who are Tech Talent Charter signatories already. Thank you, and it's welcome back. For those of you that haven't joined, you really should. It's a free and easy way to join what is now 550 other signatories. Companies who get they already understand the why of why we need to be more inclusive and diverse in tech. What we want to know is the how. And these are companies and organizations that are committed to working together. We'd love to have you join. It's free. One of the reasons that we can do all of this for free is that we have some amazing sponsors. So at the bottom of the page, you'll see the sponsors for the event. You'll see Unilever, who was our overarching sponsor, but you'll see the many companies who have sponsored each of those activities. And these are also organizations that help make sure that what we do across the year is free for all of our signatories. So I hope you can find your way through the screen. We love it when you put something on social, doesn't happen on social, it didn't really happen. So if you're on Twitter, that is hashtag TTC2021. We're also at @TechCharterUK. So that's all about the conversation that we want to have. This week has been about difficult conversations and positive action together. And we've seen this discussion go across the week. We'll talk at the end about what's happening. But one of the most important things for us is to hear from companies and for companies to share for us in a very real way what's working and not working, to explain to us their journey on how they have moved from diversity to inclusion to that ultimate state, which is belonging that we want within our companies. And one of those companies that we had a great conversation with is Unilever. Now, I had the chance of talking with 2 very senior global figures within Unilever on their journey, breaking new ground before many companies were even thinking about it on gender, but then thinking about how do they take that learning to look at true inclusion across the board. Now, part of that discussion was something that we shared on day 1, but we wanted to finish it because in the latter part of the discussion, we start not just looking back, but looking forward, which is very much what we need to think about today. So let's take a moment and settle back, get your cup in hand, and let's hear the fireside chat that I was able to have with Unilever. Hi. Thanks so much for joining us for our fireside chat. For our audience, do you mind introducing yourself before we sort of launch into the topics at hand today? ALINE.
Yes. Hi, everyone. A pleasure to be here. I am ALINE. I am Executive Vice President of Global Marketing at Unilever and also Chief Diversity and Inclusion for Unilever.
Hi, great to be here as well. I'm Steve McCrystal. I'm the Chief Enterprise Technology Officer at Unilever. So looking after all of our global business services, including technology.
One of the things that I think all of our members know, and it's why they're part of the charter, is when we're trying to solve these problems, we don't do that against an empty backdrop. There is something around what's happening in terms of society, the society in which we work. And, you know, ALINE, how do you tackle that? Because I think for companies to make a big difference and for big companies to help the sector as a whole, we have to think about that wider social commitment. Can you, where is Unilever's thinking on that?
So, you know, when at the beginning of the talk, I said that, you know, our CEO, Alan Job, has three priorities. Three priorities he has is, one, it's to be the most inclusive company. Second one, the most sustainable company. And third one, the most purposeful company. And, you know, when you combine all that, what we really want is to have a positive impact in society and in our planet. So we have a huge responsibility. We are a big company, and we know that we have to do a lot. I think that, you know, when we look at what's going on in the world today, we cannot just expect that governments or NGOs are going to solve the problems. I think that we need the businesses to help all these other entities to really drive a better society and a better planet. And that is the same, you know, in terms of our ambitions in terms of E and D&I at Unilever. We wanted to expand our own ambition in terms of a more equitable place for our suppliers, our vendors, our partners. And given our size and influence, we have the opportunity to take a corporate leadership and have a significant societal impact on a global scale. So we want our entire business to work towards the transformations in society that will tackle social inequality and unfairness, and end the marginalization of individuals and groups who are underrepresented simply because of who they are. So we have more than 400 brands at Unilever. And imagine if each of our brands start promoting, people that are not yet represented in advertising in a positive lens, breaking stereotypes. Every time you see an ad, you are breaking a stereotype. You are opening your heart, to the possibilities. You are, making people come out of that little box that someone put them there. So there is a very important role for us as advertisers, especially Unilever is the second biggest advertiser in the world. So the way we promote our stories, we can shape society. And, I'm very glad that there is something called the Unstereotype Alliance that is led by UN Women, that many companies are part of, because, we need as many companies as we can in the same kind of journey to help us to unstereotype the world. Ideally, what we wanted to do is, to have a world where people can be absolutely themselves without any judgment. And we will succeed if we feel that in our company, at least, in our workforce, everyone has this sense of belonging. You were talking about belonging before, and I think that this sense of belonging is this deep sense of inclusion where everyone receives equitable treatment, equitable access, and equitable opportunities. That would be the big win for all of us.
And it's huge in that respect. And I think if I look at the audience that are listening to us, what we'll be exploring across the 3 days is not just what you can do within your company walls, but what you can do more widely. And I'd say to the listeners, if you are also an SME, if you're a startup, we'll be talking over the 2 days on how you can be making part of the difference within your community, within your region. This is something that one of the pleasures I have in having our companies join the Tech Talent Charter is I have companies who get it and who want to be part of that positive change. So, Steve, I've got to say, you two both know I was ridiculously excited when Unilever started. Okay, so you were and it was great because you came in as our 500th signatory. So it was a real milestone for us. But why was it important for you to join the Tech Talent Charter? We know why we wanted you here. Why is it important to be part of something like the Tech Talent Charter?
Look, I think probably two or three things come to mind, Debbie. I mean, I think what ALINE talked about a little bit was the passion and seriousness that Alan and the Unilever team take this, and to boldly make social commitments externally, right? And I think in a way, it is about getting real. It's about being accountable. And so joining something like this actually makes us accountable. You know, we're standing up and saying, no, we're going to do something different. And we're not going to rest on our laurels. I'm not going to pretend that we have it all figured out, because we haven't figured it all out. That's clear. I mean, the ambition that ALINE and team are laying out, we've got work to do. And so if we don't start collaborating, if we don't start learning from others, I don't think we're going to get there. So I think it's critical that we engage in these kind of forums to really understand what's working, what's not working, because a lot of stuff doesn't work the way we think it's going to work. And so I think that's really critical. I think the other thing too is that this is the kind of thing that can help us for the future, really create a funnel of talent, funnel of very diverse talent into our teams. And I think I'm really excited about that. I mean, we're an FMCG company. We're not a technology company, but we have a pretty large amount of technology employees. And we have a role to play, I think, in terms of how we, improve the funnel of talent coming into technology. We're doing all kinds of things. They're smaller than I want them to be honest. We have a really interesting thing that we started a while back called I Am the Code, where we're trying to get women and girls actually even into coding. And we're hoping that we'll have 1 million women have gone through that by 2030, which would be fantastic. We actually have we have little labs in our offices in Brazil, in the UK, even in Kenya, actually, where we do some of this, which is really quite cool. We're also spending time through our Women in Tech network, working on a group of mentoring a group of young Black women as well, in terms of STEM training, etc. But again, it's small. Like, we need to do more to get the funnel going. And so I think we want to learn. That's point number one. We want to be accountable. And we know you will hold us accountable. We know that. And I think that's great. And then I think if we can do something to just really kind of improve the ecosystem and the funnel, I think, it'll be good for all.
Yeah. And we're really looking forward to working with you, because we are taking the next level. We absolutely share with Unilever this passion for the power of data. And I think it is challenging. Once we go beyond measuring gender, we move into trickier territory. We move into more sensitive territory. So we're looking forward to working with all of our members, and we'll be having some hackathons coming up from April on how do we as a sector begin monitoring data? How can we do it in a shared way in doing things? Things like the pipeline. On Friday, we'll be looking at different routes that organizations are taking. We'll be looking at larger organizations who are partners with us, who are looking at things like, what can we do in the schools age market? What can we do with universities? What can we do with the working age population? It is the power of scale. Look, we're nearly at the end of our time. I'm going to get both of you back in other conversations. You've made me very, very greedy for other conversations. But can you finish this out? If I'm in the audience and I'm sitting there and I'm wondering, okay, this is the only session I could sign up for in the 3 days. And at Tech Talent Chat, I always promise some actionable insights. What is the advice you'd give me if we were having a coffee on how I can move my company forward? Okay. I'll sip my coffee while we do this, my rather large coffee. So ALINE, let me know, what is it I should be doing when I get back to my desk and turn the platform off to get back to work?
Well, it's going to be a long coffee because it's a long conversation. But just to refer to another part of the tech world that is very important, which are the startups. Yeah, I was just listening to what Steve was talking, and we have inside Unilever a group called the Foundry, which is a group that relates with startups for Unilever. So we have connections with 5,000 startups, and we get to know a lot of people. And I asked the team to do a piece of research to understand the data about startups as well. And TechCrunch helped us. And at the time that we did the research, TechCrunch told us that there's only 17% of startups that are founded or co-founded by women. I was so shocked. Even in this new generation, we have such a challenge for women. There are so many barriers to be broken. And this is just to found the startup. I'm not even talking about the rest of the journey that is also so critical. So there's a lot to be done, but it doesn't matter if you have a small company or a big company. I think that, you have similar challenges. I think that, whatever is the size of your workplace, you should be committed to create a culture that promotes diversity and representation, retention, and career progression, psychological safety, and a deep sense of belonging to your employees. This is not going to happen overnight, but this has to be at the core of the very beginning of the company, or the decision of that little board or big board, whatever board, that has to be at the top of the organization. If the organization at the top believes that that is the ultimate goal, that is a very good starting point. When the top of the organization doesn't believe in that, that is a much harder journey. So, influencing the top, I think, is a very important thing, wherever you are, whenever you are a small company or a big company. I think that, the other learning is that we have learned that the inclusion is not a natural consequence of a diverse team or an organization. Sometimes you can have the representation around the table, but this doesn't mean that we are really including their voices. And I think that we need to fight hard, very hard against all these societal isms, the sexism, the racism, the ableism, ageism. So all these negative, kind of prejudice, stereotypes that we have in our minds, we need to find mechanisms to break them. We need to find ways that our leaders and our employees develop skills and language to have meaningful conversations about their lived experience. People have very different lived experiences. If we just listen, that would make a huge difference. Because, sometimes words have a power and they can help us to learn from each other, and we can start breaking taboos. So we need that, to create safe spaces, we have to listen. And we have to be really careful in not propagating more and more stereotypes. Exactly. So, be aware of that. And, anytime you are judging someone, anytime you are, making a comment, just check if you're not being stereotypical. It's not a quick fix, but it's the most important fix that you can do to your company. And I can assure you, it's the most important fix that we can do to our society.
Completely agree. And I think it is, we talk to our members, it is about, for all of us, and I say this as a woman on the journey as well, because I've had to learn about my white privilege, to learn about where I bring my stereotypes. And so it is important for there to be those conversations, the safe spaces. And we've had to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. We've had to get ready to have those conversations and learn to really move it forward. Look, thank you both. I know how insanely crazy diaries are, and trying to get us in the same virtual room, one day maybe with real coffee face to face. But in the meanwhile, listen, thank you so much. We love working with you. We'll be talking about all the topics. Thank you everyone who's listening this morning. These topics will all be dug into in much more depth across the next 3 days. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Pleasure being here.
Okay, so lots to think about, and a real sense of looking ahead beyond all the things that we're just trying to do in our own offices, in our own businesses, to think more widely. And that's really where we're going in our next panel, as we begin to think beyond just what we're doing with our workforce and just what we're doing within our own companies. So to do that, let me bring in Rebecca. Some of you will have seen her before this week, one of my directors. Over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Debbie, and a really big welcome to all of our panelists who are joining us for the final discussion of the day and also the final discussion of the festival. As Debbie said, my name is Rebecca Donnelly. I'm a director at the Tech Talent Charter, and in my spare time from that, a senior partner at Taito PR. It's been a fantastic, fascinating 3 days full of expert advice and insights. And as Debbie mentioned, we want to end by looking at that broader talent pipeline, looking to the future and talking about how we can drive change at a greater scale. So we have some brilliant guests on our panel to help us talk about that in just a moment. But before we do that, a quick reminder, please do share your questions on the Q&A panel below the screen. And we'll try and get to as many of those as we can with our panel shortly. But also, we're really keen to keep this conversation going on social media. So we would love you to share your thoughts, your feedback, your extra comments. You can use the hashtag TTC2021. And please do tag us at Tech Charter UK because we would love to hear from you. So I'm going to come to our panel now and start by asking them to introduce themselves briefly. Sheridan, can I come to you first, please?
Yes, and thank you for the invitation today. Very pleased to be here. So I'm Sheridan Ash, and I work at PwC, and I lead much of our technology innovation work there. I also set up a Women in Tech program at PwC, and have led many of our initiatives there as well. And so hopefully we'll get a chance to chat about that. And I'm also the founder of something called Tech She Can, and I know we're going to be talking about that later.
I can't wait. Thank you very much. Rachid, can I come to you next, please?
Please do. Thank you for the invitation from me also. So I'm RACHID HOURIZI. I'm the director of the Institute of Coding, which is a large collaboration of universities, more than 200 employers, and a series of outreach organizations. We're working on the parts that are key for us in the inclusion problem. So the part of the inclusion problem, the inclusion failure, which talks to the idea of higher education and entering it, learning from it, and moving on to work. We've really treated that as a process of continuous improvement rather than one single unitary problem. So we've looked at different ways to get people engaged in our pathways to tech. We've looked at different ways to teach. We've looked at different ways to support cohorts that support themselves. And we've also looked at different ways to get people work experience, which we know is a really big determinant of where people end up in subsequent careers. And as Sheridan's just said, I'm sure that we'll be talking about all of those in the conversation to come. So thank you.
We absolutely will. Thank you very much. Liz, could I ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Liz Williams. I've had a corporate career very much working at the intersect of business and society, particularly looking at the human face of digital technology. I'm currently CEO of Future.now, a B2B coalition that's all about how do we get everybody up to the digital start line with the essential digital skills for life and work. I'm also chair of the Good Things Foundation, which is the UK's leading digital inclusion charity. You'll notice digital comes through a lot in most things I talk about. And I'm also a publicly appointed social mobility commissioner, where I lead on digital and also on the future of work. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Liz. So any questions on digital, pop them below. We'll bring them to Liz. So lastly, but definitely not least, Debbie, I'm going to come to you with the first question of the discussion. But before I do that, I know you've been hosting the festival over the last few days, and I'm sure that most people here know who you are now. But is there anything you'd like to add to your introduction before we kick off the conversation, just so people can get to know you a bit better?
Debbie Forster, and I'm allowed. It is my privilege to hang out with the Tech Talent Charter crew. So I think that's enough for today.
Fantastic. Well, in that case, I'm going to stick with you, Debbie, just to give us some context around this issue when we talk about the talent pipeline. We know it's a question that comes up a lot at the Tech Talent Charter, that the area we focus on can't fix the issue of diversity and inclusion alone. So can you help us just understand what that broader issue is, and what do you say to our signatories and people you talk to when they tell you that you need to fix the pipeline?
Well, it's the first thing I say to them is you're absolutely right. The pipeline is broken. It is a broken, leaky pipeline at every stage. But I think when we headed into that, we knew that we needed to be able to focus on certain sections. And when we first set out in the spaces of the Tech Talent Charter, we had a vow to connect the dots, not to reinvent the wheel. So we were really fortunate that at the time, there were already organizations who were beginning to focus on those other parts of the pipeline. So as soon as we could, we began making those connections, because in effect, that begins to give us the coalition of coalitions. One of the things that you'll hear from each of these groups is they are working on connecting dots in relation to that part of the pipeline. You know, you'll hear about the piece, but what we know is in schools, we're not grabbing enough young people from a very young age. And we hear again and again in the research among underrepresented groups, it's because they don't know about tech. They don't understand what it means. They don't understand what it means to get into that. And that demystification part is very important. Then we find even if they got it at school, they don't go into that at degree programs. And there's been a lot of sort of systemic things that we know needed to change and what was happening at university level. And we needed to accept that it's not just from the 18 to 23-year-olds that we need to think about that university, that post-school education piece. And then we need to think about that wider workforce. You know, before we can even get some people to think about retraining in tech that we talked about this morning, we need to make sure that they have those basic digital skills, those business digital skills that can make them effective in their job, that offers a gateway, perhaps over time, that we can think about, as we did in earlier sessions today, how we might then grow them into the tech workforce. So the pipeline is crucial for us, but what we were keen to do is to connect dots with people who are doing amazing things in the space, hence joining up forces in this space.
Fantastic. Well, let's hear from some of them then. Sheridan, I'd love to come to you next and ask you just to tell us a bit more about your part in the pipeline and what TechSheCan is doing to address it.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about it. So the reason TechSheCan was born, if you like, was because the work that I was doing at PwC, where we made some substantial gains in actually doubling our females in our sort of tech workforce at PwC, I could see we were never going to get any further than that because we just weren't getting any pipeline of females and, well, girls and young women being interested at school and coming through sort of after school and degrees with the right sort of qualifications. So I knew something was really going wrong at the school age level. And I did a bit of research and also commissioned some research. And it was really insightful. And, you know, you expect things like role models is a problem, but actually some of the research findings gave us a bit more valuable information around that. So, for example, we surveyed over 2,000 students at either A-level age or that were at university, both boys, well, young women and men at that age, because we wanted to get the difference in the genders. And what was really interesting is that only 3% of the girls that we surveyed said that tech was their first choice career. Well, I found that really shocking and quite frightening, and really underpinned why we were having such a problem getting that pull through from schools and colleges and universities into the workforce. And then they also told us that role models were a problem. But when they talked about role models, they said, well, we get told about role models, but they're either dead, like Ada Lovelace, or they're Sheryl Sandberg. They're not at all relatable, are they? And I mean, why didn't I ever think of that before? Of course, you know, those role models aren't relatable to a 10, a 13 and a 14-year-old girl. So they needed relatable role models that, you know, business has all those role models. We've got them in the business. We know the careers that are there, and we've got all those role models at a younger age. And they also said they didn't get the link between how technology had a really positive impact on their communities and the world. Yes, they use it, but, you know, they want to pick careers that have a positive impact on their society, on their communities. And they didn't get that link with technology, which I was quite surprised about as well. So on the back of that research, we got some companies together from a PwC perspective originally, some of our clients, the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, and some educators, and said, look, this is a problem that's too big, like Debbie was saying. You can't solve this on your own. PwC can't solve it. Nobody can solve it on their own. It's got to be a collaboration. And I always talk about collaboration is, I think, my own superpower, because I think, you know, I've learned over the years that collaboration gets you much further in life than just about anything else. It's very difficult to achieve things on your own. Collaboration is the way forward. So that's why I think it's a superpower. And that's what TechSheCan is. It's a collaboration. And where we started off 3 years ago with 18 organizations, we're just about to hit 200. And that's a mixture of, you know, all sorts of organizations, from great big organizations like Tesco's, practically all of the banking and the financial services sector. You know, we've got charities involved. I mean, it's just so broad, the sort of membership we've got, and we're all working together and collaborating. And the first thing that we decided to do was focus on that sort of school level, because we knew that was where we were seeing a lot of the problems. So we developed something called Tech We Can, because you need to teach it to boys and girls. It's just about addressing that, the things that came out in the research. You've got to make it female friendly. And we launched Tech We Can about a year ago, and it's been phenomenally successful. You know, we're working with nearly 600 schools now. It's all free lessons. It's all digitized on a portal. It's all teachers can access it for free. And in fact, parents have been doing that over the last year while they've been homeschooling. We've had about 1,500 households accessing the material in actually 25 countries. And we created 16 video lessons as well. So people can just go in there and play the lesson, 30, 40 minutes. So it's very easy to take that in. So that's where we started. We've now hit into apprenticeships as well. So we're not trying to compete with the degree apprenticeships, but we see apprenticeships as actually being able to tackle all different parts of the pipeline. So, you know, like women returners, older women, women coming back from maternity leave, women that have just lost their jobs in the pandemic, in the retail and the leisure sector. We do some apprenticeships. We're partnering with Centrica at the moment, one of our members, around apprenticeships to get women into jobs around things like smart meters. And we're being phenomenally successful in that. There's a real need for it. So I think, you know, that I see as our way forward as well, tackling the really early pipeline, but also looking at wider parts of the pipeline in terms of apprenticeships.
Yeah. Fantastic. And I'd love to bring Rachid in here, because I think that really kind of speaks to what you're doing with the Institute of Coding. So can you tell us a little bit more about that and how you're working to make tech more inclusive?
Of course, that would be great. I would echo the point about collaboration. I think any of the barriers that we discuss are complex and multifaceted, and the idea that any one organization or any one person has the solution really doesn't make sense to me. But what we've done is looked at the part of the problem that traditionally belongs to us, the part that starts after school and goes on to work, and looked at different barriers and motivations that we could understand better in order to get a more inclusive cohort going through our part of the system. And really, I think that's describable in terms of 4 areas in which we've innovated. The first is in terms of our engagement. We've really taken a rather different approach to engagement. So rather than trying to encourage people to come to university for the sake of university, we've tried to switch the question around and look at what it is that we can offer that serves objectives that people already have. So we've run a really quite successful campaign on social media, the Control Your Future campaign, which has a number of characteristics that make it rather different from the way that we've engaged with diverse groups of learners in the past. The first being that rather than trying to encourage people to come and talk to us where we are, we've gone to join conversations where they already exist. And inevitably, there are people talking about using tech and talking about the motivation in and around tech that isn't particularly associated with the university sector. So people doing really interesting things in building smart clothes, people doing really interesting things in doing all kinds of design from fine art to engineering, people talking about ways to engage communities that matter to them. And going to those conversations has made our campaigning rather better. Better to the point that we've reached potential readership in the hundreds of millions. We've engaged learners on our programs. Currently, just over 800,000 people have engaged with Institute of Coding programs. But that engagement step inevitably is absolutely crucial. It's not okay on its own, however, and that's this idea of there not being one inclusion problem, but rather many. So we've also looked at course structure and delivery. Another change that we've made is in the ways that higher education is delivered, or advanced skills are delivered in this context. So the idea that the only way to access advanced skills is by leaving the world for 3 years and coming back afterwards a changed person, that works for some people. It does not work for large groups. So we've run very, very successful courses online, shorter, punchier, single skill, 2 skill courses. And those courses represent the bulk of our engagement to reach the 800,000. At the other end, we've also run courses for small groups that have formed cohorts and supported themselves. So our Tech Up Women program run by Sue Black at the University of Durham has been hugely successful in that area. And if you've not looked at what Tech Up Women has done, I would urge you to just go and look. They're available through our website. They're available on YouTube, and Sue, I know, is keen to chat. The other thing that we've done, as well as the different structuring and the different forms of support through cohorts and the like, is that we've looked again at work experience. We know for an obvious fact that good work experience absolutely transforms employment outcomes. But we know at the same time that the traditional way to give people work experience, which is as part of a sandwich year or part of a go to the company and work with them kind of effort, doesn't work for everyone. If I don't have the deposit to put on a flat in London, some kinds of placement are excluded for me. If I have caring responsibilities that mean that I can't move twice within a year, again, it's often true that placement is an unachievable goal for me. And therefore, looking structurally at how we deliver key parts of our programs has helped us to make real inroads into diversity and inclusion questions. And I think stepping back from those specific changes, it's really important to say that it would be easy for us, sitting where we sit in the pipeline, to say the problem's not ours. That at some point, people have already decided what they want to do by the time they're 11 or 12. Certainly by the time they're 14 or 15. So by the time they traditionally come to university, that their minds are made up. I think the kinds of numbers that we've reached with our different approaches would suggest that that's not true. That there's something for us to do at each stage of the pipeline rather than just at the very beginning of it. That's not to deny the existence of an entry problem, but it's to point out that that's not the only problem that exists.
Well, that's what we're discussing today, isn't it? That there are challenges along every stage of that pipeline. And Liz, that seems like a great moment to bring you in to tell us a bit more about how Future.now fits into all of this.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I mean, Sheridan was talking about the pipeline, and Unilever talked about not being a tech company, but actually having lots of technologists. And actually, I think that's a really good way of thinking about it, because actually we live in a digital society. And back in 2015, the government in the UK worked with industry and came up with a set of essential digital skills that people need for life and work in the UK. And if I just share with you some of that, it might help explain some of the pipeline issue that we might have, because people don't have high-end digital skills if they haven't got low-end digital skills, because they can't move up the pipe. So in the UK, according to the Lloyds Banking Group Consumer Digital Index last year, there are 9 million people that can't use the internet. They can't turn on a computer, they don't have access. There are then 11.7 million people that can't do email, can't bank online. They haven't got the essential digital skills for life. And then on that, there's the next layer, which is the essential digital skills for work. And there are 17 million people that don't have those skills. And that's very much where we're focused at Future.now. How do we get everybody up to that start line equipped with the essential digital skills for life and work? And actually, one of the things that really kind of was an unlocker for us was recognizing that also within that data, those data sets that come within the Lloyds Consumer Digital Index, was insight that said only 23% of people have had any digital skills training from their employer. Somehow we think digital skills are different and people should just acquire them. And there's often a view that actually the digital inclusion journey is a social issue. And I would argue very strongly that actually it's an economic imperative, and it's actually one that really matters to business. So that's where we're really focused at Future.now. How do we get everybody up to that starting point equipped with those essential digital skills? Because if we've got that, they can then start to build onwards. And just picking up some of the other things that we've kind of been talking about here is actually young people. You know, a lot of young people have brilliant, amazing technology consumption skills. What they don't have is they don't necessarily have the underlying understanding of how the technology works, so they can be confident creators able to use those productive skills. And actually, we've really seen that during the COVID time, as people have moved online. Actually, there's been a wealth of people that have been excluded from that. But actually, you've only got to look at what the teachers are saying about the skills they're seeing from young people as they're coming through. And I would hate to be a parent that doesn't have the essential digital skills for work, suddenly being asked to get my child onto Zoom or Teams to be able to do their schoolwork. So actually, that whole thing about how we think about that pipeline, I'm not surprised that we've got a problem at the high-end skills of digital, because we've actually got a problem at the low-end skills, because there is no pipeline to get people up there. So getting everybody up to that starting point is where we're focused at Future.now. And what we're doing is we're using business as the way to do that. Business knows how to train people, but actually business largely doesn't know about the essential digital skills. So that's what we're doing at Future.now. And I'm delighted we've already got about 130 companies working with us on that journey.
That's a brilliant point. And I think talking about what's been happening over the last year, certainly the main thing that my 7-year-old daughter has learned in the last year is how to use Google Meet. So I think it's a really good point. Thank you all for giving us that brilliant overview about what you're doing and how that kind of fits into the pipeline. But I think one of the things we were looking at today was how does that all work together? So if we're looking at how do we look into the future, how we'd like to see things change, and just kind of throwing this open to the floor, really, how would you all like to be working together to be able to address not just the issues in the part of the pipeline you're looking at, but much more broadly at scale? Anyone particularly wants to jump in?
I can jump in. What I've loved over the last 18 months or so is watching how it started on a very informal basis, insofar as, because the three of you are on are one of our signatories. Whenever somebody would come to us as a company and say, we want to do something in schools, we would be able to very quickly signpost and say, let us introduce you. And, we went from formally introducing you to putting that on our website. So the signposting was the starting point. But what I loved over the last year was really successfully we had something that we talked about at lunch today, the Doing It Anyway campaign. So this was a campaign to show more women that there's a chance for them to do retraining, returning, career conversion, etc. And this was a great opportunity to work together insofar as we were signposting. So the first thing that we could do instantly was to signpost all the Institute of Coding courses that were going on, to signpost the apprenticeships that are on offer, including some that are happening for Tech She Can. But we also use that as an opportunity to use people's skills. Rachid was talking about that really successful campaign they had done on social media. And we'd known, because we're on each other's boards, I'd seen how successfully their social media campaign reached into underrepresented groups to get that traction. So in partnership behind the scenes, Institute of Coding loaned us their social media person to help us shape and craft that campaign moving through. So it was both sort of front of house and back of house that allowed us to get much more of that in terms of collaborating and building on each other's efforts.
Anyone else want to build on that with their perspective?
I could just build on that a bit. I mean, I think how we've come together, as Debbie said, is really fantastic. And I see, as I said before, collaboration is a superpower. And I think between our organisations, we've created initiatives that address diversity and social mobility challenges across people's whole life cycle. So I think us working together, we know that we can have a greater impact. Having a more joined up approach, I like to think of it as with, together delivering those interventions at key moments that matter across people's lives, from early years at school to young adults to older people. And, I always think about it, Liz has got her sort of digital skills, and I think it's like digital skills for life, for work and for play. And I think we cover that together. So I'm really excited about the future of how we could amplify what we do by working together.
And Liz, did you want to jump in there as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the danger is that if you think you can go it alone, then it's madness. But actually, everybody's got limited time, whether you're an individual or whether you're a business. So actually, knowing where to go to get the answer to questions is really important. So actually being able to understand what the digital skills landscape is, and knowing that Sheridan and others are working in with schools, knowing that Rachid's doing working with the university, knowing where those different parts of expertise are, makes it much easier for businesses who are already working in this space to know where to go. But also, I think we need to recognize that consumers, individuals, need common language. And if we're all talking in slightly different ways, it makes it incredibly hard. And I think what we've got at the moment is a really unique moment in time, because people have basically got different motivations now. Their motivation point has changed. Nobody can doubt that we live in a digital society today. People who previously kind of would be saying, actually, I'm not too worried about that digital thing because I've got all the analog ways, they're still there. What we've seen during this period is that analog things have suddenly, you've not been able to go to the bank, but actually you've had to embrace the, online banking or whatever. Suddenly people have started to get different motivations. So I think young people see it differently in terms of tech careers. Actually, I might not have thought about Unilever as being a tech company, but of course they are. The same way that, the retailers are and everybody. So actually that thing about how we signpost and work more collaboratively is so important.
Absolutely. Something I wanted to pick up on in a moment, but I wanted to just come to Rachid to see if he wanted to get a final point in on this topic.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to raise the point about speed. Picking up on Liz's point about different expertise as well as time limits, we innovate faster if we get the existing experts in a room arguing with each other than if we each try and learn each lesson individually. And I think one of the real strengths of this group is that we've been able to move considerably faster in each of our initiatives because of the collaboration. So that's all I wanted to say here. Thanks.
Thank you. I actually wanted to
Can I build one more thing though? Actually,
go on then.
I think the other thing that is exciting is that back of house piece that Rachid's talking about as well, because all of us are not for profit, and there's a whole lot of problem, not a lot of time, and not a lot of resource. So looking and finding ways in which we are reinforcing each other's learning, knowledge, expertise, as Liz says, creating shared vocabulary, shared ways of doing, I think we really start becoming much greater than the sum of our parts.
Fantastic. I'm going to come to some of the audience questions in a minute because we started to get some really interesting ones in. But before I did, I wanted to just come back to you, Rachid, and also building on what Liz was just talking about of people realizing that, of course, Unilever is a tech company. You mentioned the importance of engagement, and we've heard in other sessions earlier on today the importance of demonstrating the overlap between tech skills and other kinds of skills, creative skills, consultancy skills, soft skills. How important is demonstrating that overlap? How important is that in terms of encouraging young people to consider tech as a possible career for them?
I think it's crucially important in two areas. The first is in terms of motivation. So we know that there are many people that come and talk about tech and learn about tech and apply tech because they have another interest, because they have an objective that is not directly tech related, but tech gets them there faster. And I think that's something that we've learned in each of the campaigns that have been talked about to this point, that if we talk to the objectives that people already hold, they come and they talk to us. If we insist that they come and talk about the objectives that matter to us, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So at the start of the pipe, I think it really matters that we acknowledge rather more complex motivations than we sometimes tend to. At the other end, it's also increasingly true in the changing workplace that others have talked about. There are some jobs that are truly tech jobs. There are many, many more that are jobs to do with engineering and tech, or legal work and tech, or retail and tech. Those combinations of skills are what satisfy the demand, not the idea of a single skill standing alone and ruling all others.
Thank you. Brilliant points. I'm going to come to some questions from the audience. I wanted to sort of preface that with a question to you, Sheridan, through your work at PwC. We've had quite a few questions over the course of the 3 days, and we've seen a couple already in this session about how do you, if you're somebody who works in a tech organization or any other organization, recognizing this is an issue and something you're looking to tackle, how do you make sure that you get your senior stakeholders on board, engaged, putting their voice behind any programs that you might want to launch? What are your best tips?
Well, it clearly is essential to do that, because one of the biggest things about making change happen in an organization is demonstration of commitment to that change by the leaders throughout the organization. So you need that commitment. And then for me, you need a set of catalysts to make it happen. You know, what are the initiatives that you're going to deliver? Because you can't just have commitment. You know, you can get leaders to say, yes, we know that's the right thing to do, but what are the catalysts, the policies, you know, the work-life balance, the, you know, getting women back from maternity leave, allowing them to work just 3 days a week, you know, all the things, unconscious bias training. Some people don't think that's a thing, but at PwC we do. Some people will get that joke. You know, all those important things, you need the set of policies and the set of initiatives that you form in almost like a crafted way to deliver at the right time that suits your organization to change the culture and the way it thinks about these things. I mean, I can tell you we've done this really successfully at PwC. When we started our initiatives, only 14% of our workforce, technology workforce, were female. It's now 31%. And we've got 3,500 technologists at PwC just in the UK. But that commitment bit at the leadership level is the first and most important bit. And the thing that I did to get that is I went armed with statistics about our own company, about other companies, and I went armed with initiatives that I saw elsewhere that were working and didn't. Go not moaning, go with some evidence of what it looks like in your organization, and then evidence of what works.
That's incredibly useful advice. And I think we've heard repeatedly over the course of the last 2 days about the importance of data to know what it is you're trying to achieve and how you're going to measure your success and the impact that's going to have on the business. Liz, did you want to build on that point?
I was just going to add a stat, actually. It's a brilliant one. 88% of leaders who receive digital skills training say that their organization grew. And that compares with 49% who didn't have any training. And I think there's something about people see it. If they see it, they believe it. But I think it's also not only about senior leaders. I think actually to get change in an organization, there's a bit about the top, but there's a middle layer that can really make a difference. You've got to go into the organization at all levels, actually getting the hearts and minds of middle managers and actually seeing how that it plays into their objectives is also important. So that thing about how organizations see it playing into what's important to them, you know, whether that be profitability, stability. I mean, the number of organizations that just had to shut down during COVID because they didn't have, you know, the digital skills to be able to carry on, or the digital technology. You know, there's a whole piece there that's very interesting.
Thank you. Debbie, did you have a point you wanted to build on there?
Building what Liz said, it's interesting, and it's that crucial middle piece that we've talked about for a few years. And I think what was encouraging this year was we were actually able to do a survey with a test looking at middle leaders and middle IT leaders. So this wasn't just tech talent charter. So it wasn't just the choir. This was a wider piece. And really what came through was, first of all, the vast majority absolutely were positive about the D&I efforts. Okay, so that's the good news. The bad news, and that tough conversation we were talking about, was the concerns that were coming up and the discomfort some were feeling in the how. And so it is about those tough conversations. It is about exactly what Sheridan said about those data-led. It's got to be data-led. It's got to have the accountability, but it is those ongoing discussions, winning people over, creating the psychological space for people involved, moving people forward in those constant nudges to get the middle leaders and to change that process going through. So it is an ongoing process. There's no single magic bullet, but I was encouraged this year to look at those stats and to realize the idea of having to win the middle leaders, that is looking very positive. The sort of why we now need to help build the confidence and trust and safety around the how.
Thank you. Rachid, I think the panel have talked a lot there about senior leaders and that sort of the middle management, the middle of the team. Is there anyone else who needs to be around the table when you're starting these conversations? Oh, you're on mute, I think. Or you?
It was a matter of time until I left myself on mute. I think obviously yes, and you know, one of us has to say that the people we want to travel through the pipeline have to be part of those conversations. But I think it's worth coming back to this idea of rather more complex objectives and rather more complex motivations, and talking about the idea that when we really start to unpack that complexity, we also need people that represent it in each part of the planning process. So we still don't fully understand what it is that's blocking people at different parts of the pipeline. We conducted some research, for example, that showed that for women who had not gone into tech careers at the start of their working life, a majority, more, I think 54% of them felt that they could not get back once they've made a choice not to start in tech. And that gave us real insight into the kind of training that was needed, the kind of cohort that were needed, and so on. So continuous engagement with the people that we want to pass through.
And that also relates to existing employees, particularly older employees. And we've had a question from the audience on that topic exactly for Liz. So the question is, where can we signpost older employees who suddenly find themselves redundant but without basic digital skills that many workplaces demand?
This is a terrible answer, but it's genuinely the truth. Actually, they need to go online. Now, there is a, that obviously is a bit of a thing, but the best place I would recommend is to go to the skills toolkit that has been established by the DFE, Department for Education. It's got a whole range of content, including from the Good Things Foundation, the organisation that I chair. We've got, actually it can get you from the basics right the way through. And if you'd have turned around to me at the start of lockdown and said, is it possible to get somebody online from zero during lockdown? Actually, we've been able to do that. So within Good Things Foundation, we run a network called the Online Centres Network. We've got local charities that will help people. But if you've got some basic digital skills, I'd encourage you to go and look at that skills toolkit online, and there's bite-sized chunks to get you through there, from literally how do I use a mouse.
Thank you. But there's also going to be a lot of older employees who are really amazing at tech and have fantastic skills. And we've had another question on that topic, which I might come back to you again, Liz, and then ask the rest of the panel if they want to contribute. The question is, 53% of our UK labour market are looking to retire early. Some will be tech experts. Could we look at inviting this diverse group in to teach as guest lecturers?
So my answer to that would be, yeah, we absolutely should. But what we need to make sure is they're able to be relevant to the young people that we're hoping they're going to inspire. But I'm absolutely sure that Sheridan, for example, if she could get an army of those people to be able to go out there and really inspire young people, I reckon she'd bite people's hands off to do that. Sheridan, maybe you want to come in.
No, absolutely. And I wish I was one of those people that could retire at 53. I have to say, it
was 53%. 53% looking to retire early, not looking to retire at 53. We don't know exactly.
Wow. I mean, I actually think keeping the older generations, well, as people get older, engaged in digital skills is really important for them as well. Even if they are tech experts, you can soon get on with it, if you know what I mean, with the latest technologies. But if they could take a mentoring role and a helpful role in working with either their own age group or sort of a bit younger, I think they could be a great help to all people of all ages.
Rachid, is that a missed opportunity at the moment that we're not using kind of older tech pioneers to inspire the next generation?
Hugely, and I'd like to make a couple of points on this if I could. The first one is directly to the question. Yes, absolutely, to inviting people with experience and skill to teach. Remember that teaching is not simply standing at the front of a lecture theatre and talking at people. Mentoring matters, small group discussion matters. Simply being a resident expert that can be referred to matters. So I think a series of roles, all of which represent different teaching styles, matter. I think underpinning this, sorry.
Go ahead.
I'll say one more thing, is that okay?
Yeah.
I think underpinning that, though, we need a real structural shift to understand what lifelong learning is and how we support it. So I think we are still held back by an implicit understanding that learning happens early in your life and never again. That's not true for anybody I know, and certainly isn't true for me. So a real focus on modular, stackable learning through life, I think, would change an awful lot about how we teach and train.
Thank you. We've had another question on that topic, but before I come to that one, Debbie, you have a lot of experience in the education space. Did you have any builds you wanted to make on those points?
But I would even want to take a step back with my tech talent charter hat on. The one thing I would say, now there are people who are just cannot wait to retire, but I think we also need to start looking at our aging population and thinking, yes, there are people who want to retire from full-time, full-on work. But if there's one thing that we've been talking about throughout the Tech Talent Charter is about flexible working. And, you know, in working with TimeWise, we've realized when we talk about flexible working, and in particular, we're talking remote and meaningful part-time work and flexi hours, this is something that actually opens some doors. And when they talk about it, this isn't just something that helps the mummies. This is looking across a range of populations, including the aging population. So as well as getting them in to start teaching and coaching those things, which I think is fabulous, let's make sure they absolutely want to go. And there's not a way that we can retain some of that expertise in different ways. You know, I know, for example, how much I've benefited in different roles at different organizations, where having a part-time, older tech expert who wanted to work with us as a not-for-profit was gold dust for us. So I think it's a sort of more flexible way of understanding not just, you know, lifelong learning, but a different patterns of working to try and do that.
Thank you. We've had another question, really getting into some of the nitty-gritty around learning in the curriculum, and I wonder whether, Rachid, I could bring it to you. The question is there any progress with the government changing the curriculum so that students have more flexibility to choose tech subjects over humanities and languages, etc.?
So there is some. I am at some level. I am an academic, so I'd like to answer the question I wish had been asked, as well as the question I actually was.
Okay, but then I'm going to come back to you and push you on the one.
It's a matter of time. So I think the idea that it's either or is one that we need to move beyond. It's not viable to have a set number of channels and you must be in one of them and there are no others. So in that line, yes, we've made some progress. Yes, we have more flexibility at some points in the educational curriculum. There are parts that are still blocked. There is still one and only one GCSE available around tech, and that's a problem. But I think that back to the point about lifelong learning before I stop, we know that only 1.5% of university budgets are spent on adult education. And therefore, that which you learned when you were at the end of your educational career at university or before is in many cases the last thing that you've learned formally, and that really must change.
Liz or Sheridan, did you have a point of view to add on this question around whether that the government's actually changing the curriculum, whether it's easier for younger people to follow tech than it has been in the past?
Shall I go first?
Sure.
Yeah. So I agree with what Rachid said about it shouldn't be either or, and certainly what we've done with the Tech We Can lessons is they're all about how you use tech in different ways. You know, how you might use it in a certain sector or engineering and manufacture, how you might use it in sport. So we deliberately designed it like that so that teachers can teach tech in every single subject in the school. So I think that is the way forward, and it's how we've basically established what we do, because we could see that was a real problem. The other thing I'd like to just say, and this is a horrible statistic, but really emphasizes the problem that we have right now, is the new computer science GCSE is not working for females. Last year, there was only 21% participation by females, which is almost half what it was 2 or 3 years ago when we were delivering the old ICT GCSE. It was 40%. Something is really going wrong there. We're going backwards. So that's something I'd really like to address with the DFE.
Okay. Thank you. Just to let our audience know, we've just got a few more minutes left of the Q&A with our panelists before we move on to our kind of final slot of the festival. So if you do have any more questions you would like to ask them, get them in ASAP. But we have had one in that I'm going to put to Liz, if I could, looking at recruiting. This question, Liz, it's quite a long one, so bear with me. I recruit purely on merit, but the team I have built is largely 30s, 40s white males with beards. Our job ads and recruitment process get great feedback about being true to agile, but how do we encourage more diverse applicants with more diverse ways of thinking? Liz, what do you think?
Well, great question. I don't want to be beardist, but we do need lots more diverse people in there. So Openreach did a really interesting piece of work looking at hidden gender bias in job ads. Openreach built the network, the telecommunications network, and what they found was that 50% of female applicants are put off by a language in job ads. And what they did was they took the same job and they wrote it in two different ways. So the first job, which actually was the original one they had, was being an Openreach engineer. That was the job title, and it talked about keeping families in touch, making sure businesses continued working. And the second way that they reframed it was they said, could you be a trainee network coordinator? Could you help us create networks that bring people together? Are you comfortable talking to people? Are you good at multitasking? And that language point led to a massive change in the number of applicants. So I think it's interesting to hear when you see things like being true to agile in that sentence that you were describing there around that job advert. What might that look like if it was done in a more gender-friendly way?
Rachid, oh, sorry, Liz, did you finish?
No, that's fine.
Fantastic. Rachid, what's your take on this question?
Sure. I just wanted to say that one of the issues here is what we mean by merit. So if we really do want to promote diversity, we need to look at all of the qualities that people bring to jobs. And again, in this bilingual or multilingual world where people have multiple talents, maybe we value some of the others and accept that digital can be taught rather than assuming that people will come fully formed. And I know that, again, the bit of the pipeline that I focus on, that's particularly true. We have a very narrow set of metrics. And if people don't fit them, then we can't deal with them. I'm sure that's true elsewhere too.
Thank you. Debbie, can I see if you had anything you wanted to add to that last question around inclusive job ads?
Well, and I'd urge people to look in the report. We've got some great advice on things to put in. And there are things around less is more. Be really, really clear and unpack some of your jargon, but also some of your needs. You know, we've had some great discussions across the week. Are you putting degree in? Do you need a degree? What does that mean? And it's also about what I would say in your job descriptions is to think about anytime you're putting together a job description, are you user testing it? Are you using the data to follow through to see if it's bearing the fruit that you want to do? And it is about, there are a number of organizations that are working with companies and can help. And there are tools online to help simplify things on job descriptions. But I think there is a sense of this becomes part of the ongoing culture training piece that we need to do with our hiring managers, with our recruiters, etc., which is going back to being clear about what you really need. What is the potential you're looking for? And then we had Dr. Anne-Marie Impiden who was talking, and she talked about, you know, we're now very used to when we check a document that we automatically spell check it. We need to get so used to looking at how we remove barriers in our language. We need to start having a belonging checker to go through our documents, to go through our job descriptions, and to really ask ourselves, are we throwing up barriers that need to be there? How can we remove those barriers to make it easier to come in? You know, beyond the job descriptions, we heard some powerful descriptions on companies who are completely rethinking the application process. One of our women talked to about that a smaller company, so this isn't something that just big companies do, said as part of the application, come spend the day with us, work on a sort of hack day. So we can see what you do, but you can see how you fit with the team. So I think it is that willingness to go back to first principles and to take people with it, because it's not just the job description. That is merely the surface of what are we thinking in terms of the attraction and then the actual application process that's going to change to bring people in?
Yeah, so it's not much good in getting your job description beautifully written, inclusive, if the company culture and the way you're set up to actually recruit and then support that person is not also aligned to it. Thank you. I think we're nearly out of time for the Q&A. I wanted to just ask one last question, because we've covered data a lot over the last 2 days and also in this session. But somebody has asked, how do you assess the impact of your actions to know if your efforts are driving the right results? And I think it's always something we can explore in a bit more depth. What data should we be measuring? How do we know if it's a success? Sheridan, can I ask for your take on that question?
Well, I think at a company level, it's the same as what I was saying earlier. It is data driven, but you need to, once you've developed the sort of initiatives and the policies that you've got going to implement, you need to measure the success of those. And, don't expect always quick things to happen. It can take a long time to really shift numbers, but you need to be able to have some sort of targets or things that you're aiming for across the organization. And for me, I think it's about holding senior people and leaders responsible for the results as well. So I think, it is data, but you've got to have a way of collecting the data. So not just the gender data, but pulse surveys about how people are feeling, all those good things. I think at a schools level, it's really difficult. And certainly the work that we're doing with schools, I don't expect to see results for 5 to 10 years. We're in this for the long haul. It's a societal level problem. We're not going to change it overnight. That's why we're collaborating.
Absolutely, a very, very important point. And on that topic, looking at how to address the whole talent pipeline and what a business does, we're more or less out of time for our Q&A. So I wanted to just ask our panel to leave us with their closing thoughts on that. And Rachid, perhaps if I could come to you first, what would your one bit of advice be for a company, for somebody who's watching today, that could be the most important thing they do in the next 12 months, or how they can consider the whole pipeline in their recruitment and retention strategy?
Thank you. My one point would be to go where the conversation is. The people that you want to attract are talking about their motivations, talking about the barriers they face, talking about the choices that they're making. Go to where they are already talking, rather than hoping that they'll come and talk to you.
Thank you. Liz, can you give us your one piece of advice? What's your closing thought?
So I'd pose a question. So do you know the digital skill level of your workforce? And does it match your organization's digital self? And if it doesn't, then actually come and talk to us. We can help you do that. We can help you know where to get started. And with my social mobility hat on, I'd say, do you consider social mobility through the employee life cycle? And do you know how to measure that? And if you don't, then the killer question you could be asking is, what was the main breadwinner's occupation when you were 14? If you put that in, you'll start to see what your organization is really like, both from attraction all the way through. It's a really good stat.
Wow, fantastic. Probably not one that most people would have initially thought of. Debbie, can I ask for your sort of closing thought on this panel? I know we're going to be talking in a bit more breadth about the whole festival in a minute, but what's your one thought on this specific topic you'd like to leave us with?
I want to use what we heard from Unilever, from Steve. Don't reinvent the wheel. Connect with what is already going on the ground. And, this is why we think partners like TechSheCan, Institute of Coding, and Future.now are so important. Put your energies in with what other companies are to get that big bang. We can't accomplish enough in isolation. Join these other organizations to help really move the dial in this space.
Thank you, Debbie. And Sheridan, lastly, coming to you, what would your one piece of advice be for companies who are listening today that they should take action on in the next 12 months?
Well, I struggle with the one bit of advice, but I'd like to say
all right, too.
I'd like to say that my advice is one point, and it's about getting your, for an organization, get your strategy sorted. And I think if you use my 3 C's framework, how do you get the right commitment visible internally and externally in your firm? What are the catalysts that you're going to deliver for change? And how do you craft that together, the catalysts at the right time in the right way that's suitable for your organization and your people? And that's all underpinned by data and evidence. That's how I started my strategy, and it's worked.
Fantastic. That seems like a brilliant point to close on. So I wanted to just pause it there with our panelists and say a huge, huge thank you to you all for sharing your time and your expertise. We're going to just spend the last few minutes of this session and also the last few minutes of the festival just talking to the Tech Talent Charter CEO and co-founder, Debbie Forster, and we're just going to reflect on some of the key takeaways and what we've learned over the last few days. So Debbie, thinking back to over the last 3 days, there's been so much amazing information, so many incredible insights. If we think about the first day where we were really looking at the current state of play, we were looking at the data, but we also heard some good news, right? We heard that the UK tech sector has grown over the last 12 months. There are more tech roles than ever before, and that women are taking up a larger number of those roles, both among the Tech Talent Charter signatories, but also across the wider industry. But there is still a long way to go. And we heard from people who analyze the data, experts in the field, and a lot of employers who are addressing this. So my question to you is, if our theme for this festival has been tough conversations that lead to meaningful actions, what have been some of the toughest conversations that we've heard over the last few days?
I think on day one, the first big issue was digging beneath the data. So yes, 25% sounds great, but that's nowhere near the sort of tipping point. And so we have to accept that, as Unilever referred to it, we're still at base camp in many ways in looking at just the lens of gender. And so we do need to start thinking not just the recruitment, but we need to look at that retention, the growth, and the promotion piece. And in that, we began looking at thinking about how do we use what's happened under COVID, really grasping the nettle of what flexible working means. It isn't just remote working, and really resisting any temptation of, now that COVID's over, as their lockdown opens up, we get back to the old normal. So it was the idea of how are we using things like the flexible working, the remote working, the part-time working, the assistance to families and carers to put that together. How are we doing that in terms of gender? I think the other interesting piece, and there were some great conversations that resonated that day and into the next one, which was we exploded the myth that happened before Christmas in the tabloid press that, oh, unconscious bias training is useless. There's just no point doing it. So let's get rid of that. What we heard from the behavioral insights team and then from companies who are using it is, one, it is true. If all you're doing is focusing on culture, if all you're doing is the odd unconscious bias training, you're not going to get out of the starting gates. That's not going to move the dial. That really moving into inclusion and belonging is that you have to, as we keep saying it again, it's got to be data-led conversations. It has to have the accountability. It has to have the targets. Those have to be, we heard someone say, presence doesn't matter, it's results that matter. And we heard from, for example, that one company took their hiring data for the last 5 years and put that in front of all of their managers to understand where were they hiring, where were they promoting. That kind of data moves the discussion on. But you got to have, to get the data, we started hearing, once you move beyond gender, we're moving into more sensitive areas where asking for that data becomes trickier. And so we heard from companies those difficult internal conversations on how do we get people to share the data with us? How do we create that transparency, that psychological safety, that sense of trust to get the data to begin acting on it?
Well, we've heard a lot about the importance of getting that culture right and how the tone has to come from the top. And I think, Sheridan and some of the panel we had earlier helped us look at some ways that we could engage senior leadership if they're not already engaged, by using data and using what they're setting out to achieve. I think what's really interesting there is then how they can actually, how they can actually use that across the organization, not just to do some training with one small group of people, or not just to kind of have the senior management team on board, but how that filters down across all levels.
And it's using the data for targeted interventions, because again, I can measure a table every day and it's still going to be a table. If you're using the data and you're then putting in interventions, and we had some interesting discussions on those interventions and the concepts of equity. How do we accept that in order to achieve equality, we may have to do some structural pieces. We may need to do some interventions to recognize previous barriers and to get people to the ground. One of my favorite comments was when Anne-Marie Impeden talked about that, equity is the petrol station on the way to equality. And it's that, that's a necessary part. It's not the destination, but it is what is needed to get that equality going forward. And I think that was important, as was the idea of one of our panelists talked about data isn't just quantitative data, it is qualitative data. And it's talking to people and listening to people. And that's what we needed to look at when we looked at equity and the sense of belonging. You can't do it to people. You have to do it with people. And it's not just one conversation. One conversation with one Black person does not give us the information to know how to create belonging at a growth mindset for everyone in the organization, for every Black person. It's those little conversations.
We talked a lot about that on day 2, and the importance of recognizing people's lived experiences, and that as you say, everybody has a different experience of how they came to be where they are. One of the really interesting topics that I think came up in day 2 was this idea of how an organization balances what they're doing internally with what they're doing externally. And we saw a lot of companies getting criticism, justly so, after Blackout Tuesday last June, for just posting a black square to their social media accounts and not really doing anything else. Do you think that has perhaps made some companies reluctant to talk about what they're doing or their intent externally? And what are the risks that if they do shy away from that?
Well, I think part of what we talked about throughout was, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. There are going to be things that companies have to accept that they're sometimes going to get it wrong. And actually, we heard very powerfully from a panel that you ran that was, saying nothing is a bigger mistake, doing nothing. But it is making sure that you're combining what you're saying with what you're doing. It has to be paired with real action inside and sustained. This isn't something you do something on the hashtag and Black History Month and then you're done. This is an ongoing piece, an ongoing journey, and we have to be listening along the way.
And Sheridan talked today, and we've heard it a few times, about the importance of relatable role models, which is a really important thing companies can do in kind of showcasing what they have done. So rather than just coming out with intent and words, but actually showcasing the initiatives, working with their teams. And I think that's something that came across in the panel at lunchtime today with all of that, the fantastic women who have had those alternative routes into tech, how they themselves, they've come on this panel today to showcase what their companies have done, what is possible. And I think that is a really great lesson to look at. How do you talk about what you're doing externally? Well, talk to the people in your organization and do it with them.
Absolutely. And we've heard, companies talking about the storytelling. We heard from one of our companies saying that actually getting people talked about their lived experience from a social inclusion perspective really opened eyes and opened doors and possibilities for people. But I think we did hear in another panel, be careful and be wary in this, that as well as your role models, you want your champions and your allies, particularly if you have a small number of an underrepresented group, you don't want to run the risk of trotting them out for everything and it feeling performative. This has to be, and this is also something that talked about, yes, it is about coaching and mentoring and supporting underrepresented groups, but it's not to say that it's they who need to have the big significant change. What we need to look at is the system changes. We need to look at the mindsets that are creating barriers, that are keeping representation down, but beyond representation, just getting in the company, getting up to leadership and management. And we need to look and be very purposeful and data-driven and intentional about these interventions that we can do to change the representation at all levels.
Yeah. And you mentioned social inclusion there, which is something we started looking at yesterday and also came up today. And one of my favourite terms from today was from Claire Streets in the lunchtime session, where she talked about squiggly careers. And I think that's such a brilliant phrase, because there's this idea, isn't there, that when you're looking for great talent, you look for people with linear careers who've, you know, went to the right university and got these qualifications and then went and did this training. And I love the idea of just getting rid of that concept and recognizing the importance and the benefits of those kind of diverse experiences from people who have jumped about a bit and maybe had some time out of the workforce and had bringing other qualities and experience to your organizations, and the benefits of that.
And we heard that again yesterday as well from Sir Kenalisa, and he used this analogy from a sports perspective. You know, in football, you get out there and you find talent wherever it is. You don't care where they went to school, what they did, but you're also not being sloppy. He used the analogy of, if I've got a goalkeeper, I don't go out and hire dozens of other goalkeepers. I will go out to find the full range of people to bring in, because I need that full range of skills if I'm going to bring it in. And if you're driven by a sense of what makes you competitive, you will go to find talent wherever they are, not just in your own little bubble.
And I love that football analogy, and I'm going to be using that one in future. But on that note, I mean, Debbie, we're nearly out of time for the whole conference. So I wanted to firstly say thank you for having me, and it's been an absolute privilege to be part of this conversation. But I wanted to pass it back to you just to give you the chance to kind of finish off with your closing points and take us out for the weekend.
Okay. All right. So we're nearly done. We're on the last 5 minutes. This was a huge experiment for us. We've never done a Flexi Festival. And so thank you for those of you who've been with us on the journey. Thank you for everyone who was back of scenes to making this happen across the piece, for all my panelists, my facilitators, and all the fun and games we've had when tech monkeys have, thrown spanners in the works and not made it work for us. Thank you for our sponsors who have made this all possible when this was just a crazy idea that we had before Christmas. If you've not joined the Tech Talent Charter, please do so. We want you in the room to help us move the dial. If you have one of these conversations that you wish you'd heard, next week we'll be putting out a blog that summarizes all the key learnings, the surveys, everything that we're doing. We'll also have on YouTube all of the fireside chats, the events that you can listen to at your leisure to do that. If you're someone who wants to find out more about the topics, have a look at our open playbook, look at our working lunches. If you have some expertise, I mean, particularly we have hackathons. Hackathons take across the month, and it's where our experts come together to share expertise. We have a set of hackathons that will coming up in April, looking at topics like data, apprenticeships, looking at the picture of how we can really move the dial in this space on social inclusion. So if you're interested in that, this is the place to be. But be on the journey. Think about what are your tough conversations that you need to have, but more importantly, how do you then bring it together into action? Think about how you move your company from a place of diversity to inclusion, and then use equity to create the belonging that will make you the innovative, the growing, thriving organization that you want to be part of. Thank you to everyone. I hope you have a fantastic weekend. I am hoping to fill this with something a little stronger than coffee in a while. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.